we will get started. This is the Burlington Development Review Board meeting for May 20th. I'm the Vice Chair, Kristen Hopper, and we will go through the agenda in the order in which they appear. There are 2 items on the agenda. All of the communications associated with those items are posted online. The first item is 475 Lake Street, which is recommended for consent. Do we have the applicant? Said online.
Here we have Zach Williamson. Hey Zach. You're up.
Hello.
Is there anyone from the board who objects to this being handled as a consent item?
No.
Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this item? Okay. And then Zach, then question for you, if you have seen the staff report and if you have any questions or concerns about the conditions included within the staff report.
You're asking me about a staff report? I'm not entirely sure what that is, to say the truth.
So the staff report is posted online, which includes the recommendation for consent approval, so that would have.
Yep. I see that now. Sorry, I didn't realize that's what it was. Yes, no, I've seen it and I don't have anything to add.
Okay. With that, I have a motion.
I move to accept this as for the consent agenda.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, all those in favor? Marina, voting on the.
Marina, are you voting on this? Hopefully you are.
I can. So yes.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. You're all set. Thank you. Moving on to the second and final agenda item, we have sketch plan review for 453 Pine Street. This is a sketch plan. Do we start? We don't swear in, right?
Don't swear in first, schedule plan. Backing up just briefly, we don't usually get them anymore, but we did get a communication unrelated to tonight's agenda items. Back when we used to get them, the board would just make a motion to accept the communication and place on file. We can do that, or we can circle back to that after that's.
What's the communication?
For this item or?
Nope. It
Unrelated.
was for 276 Eagle Parkway tree clearing application, a neighbor checking in with some communication about it.
Okay, I guess we'll handle that after. Let's just see what happens.
Do it afterwards, because we haven't seen it. It's not in the packet, right?
It is in the package.
It is?
Yep.
Where?
You know, Joseph?
Will it get added late?
Let's just make sure. Oh, it.
Well, I'll look around, I'll look under the rug while we're looking at the sketch plan.
Okay,
What's online?
over to you to walk us through what you want.
And before we start, can we just remind ourselves, I need to say, before we start, I'd like to say that I did a little preliminary consulting for the previous proposal on here. And I've also done consulting for the applicants at some point in the past, but I don't think it's gonna affect my ability to weigh in on this.
Public comment will be asked.
Yes.
But my question is, do we end up, is this just for us to open our eyes and ears? We don't need to vote tonight.
Right, it's not an action
This is
item.
just providing,
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Doug Nettie, and I've got a long, interesting relationship with Pine Street, so I'm happy to be here. You know, it all started in 1985 when I was selling Christmas trees on Pine Street, and that on this site right here for 5 years. After that, I moved on to work on the dealer.com building, changing out the specialty filaments to what it is now. It used to be dealer.com and Champlain Chocolates for those who weren't around before. After that project, I worked on the People's Bank, converting that, repurposing that building for office and apartments. And then that happened about 2020, 2022. I just finished up the Nest project, which is a 9-story apartment building next to People's Bank and then in 2020, my partner and I started Pizza 44 and my office is right down the street. So I've got a long, interesting relationship with Pine Street, and I bring this project to the board thinking it's another good project. We're in need of housing in the city of Burlington. In this project, 116 new apartments. Of that, about 18 apartments will be affordable. I think it's a quality project. My development partner, Alain Youkel, who's also the architect, can't be here tonight. So we won't get into deep discussions about the architecture, but Scott Mapes, who's also our consultant, is going to kind of take you through the building and the site plan. So Scott?
Do you want the PDF you sent me, Scott?
And I will ask you to pop that, if you could go to the site plan to start with.
Okay. Alright.
Yeah, it should be, is that drawing number 1? It should be there you go. So I'm Scott Mapes. I've worked on various renditions of projects proposed on this site for probably 20-some years. You folks last saw the Silt project. The Silt project was proposed for the same property. That was approved, I think, in 2022. That went through this review as well as multiple state reviews. The difference between Silt and this project, I'll explain some of the differences. What we do know is that the Silt project was also subject to a state grant of $6 million to cover the corrective action. That's to help clean up the site for the development. As that project developed near the end, estimates came in that were substantially greater than the $6 million for that project's corrective action plan. That caused that developer to pull out. They at that point in time weren't able to kind of find how they could close that gap. This project, we've used the information that we learned from Silt. So if I may, I'll just step up here. Several important features about, and let me know if I'm in your way. The Silt project consumed pretty much 80% of this site. So when we took a look at why that corrective action plan was so significant in cost, we were forced to reevaluate, well, what were the drivers? The drivers to develop this site are any soil that has to be excavated has to be removed and sent to a lined landfill because of the nature of the soils. That's a very costly part of that corrective action. The other part of the corrective action plan was the number of site amenities that required being subject to corrective action. The corrective action is what you do to the site to allow it to be occupied, whether it's for a commercial use or a residential use. It's what allows the site to be safe for that use. So we took the drivers, the cost drivers, and we realized both from a geotechnical perspective, but also site stability perspective, that you want to be concentrating your building is east of what I'm going to refer to as the peat line, because that allows the site to assume the weight of the project without having any hydrogeological impact. I'm sorry, Scott, did I do something here?
Yeah.
There we go. So it allows a project to be actually sited on the property that doesn't cause any change in hydrogeologic conditions, which is a condition that we're required on this property because the barge canal, which is further west of this property, is the containment feature of the contamination that resulted from the gasification plant. So our obligation on this property is to do nothing that would cause that remedy that's in the barge canal to fail or to allow any of the contaminants to migrate. that suggests to us to push a project further east and not to the west of the property. So what we have proposed is 2 buildings east of the peat line, reduce significantly the amount of surface parking. So from an impervious perspective, the comparison of this project with silt is a greater reduction in proposed impervious. There are 2 contaminants of concern. One is what they call NAPL. That's a line back here that was delineated back in 2012. It's been updated since then, 2014. That's the byproduct of the gasification plant that was discharged into the barge canal. And back in the time of the early EPA reports, it was referred to as a free phase contaminant. The other contaminant of concern, which is not unusual in Burlington's PAHs, polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, and they're usually associated with fossil fuel combustion, which is not unusual in older cities. Scott, if you could just pull that plan up that I had sent you. And the reason why I'm going through some of this background psych issues is because the project requires to develop a corrective action plan to residential standards. Because we're proposing a residential project, it now requires that we actually propose a corrective action plan that meets those residential standards. And I want to just show you where we're starting from as far as some of those contaminants. So you're going to see a purple area, a pink area, and a green area. Those are the PAH levels. You've got 1.8, 1.8, and 8.7. It's kind of interesting that in the area of where the railroad spurs, the PAHs are a little bit higher, but not unusual. We're required as a part of this project to develop a corrective action plan that brings the limit down to 0.58. So you've got 1.8, we've got to bring anywhere that's subject to the corrective action plan down to the residential standard, which is 0.58 milligrams per kilogram. So that just shows you that as we move further to the east, we're getting outside of the area of where those PAHs reside. We still need to develop a corrective action plan will be any part of the property that will be accessible by the residents. So that's our requirement. It's also the requirement that we have with both the state and the EPA that have said to us, there's a easement on this property that's limits or does not allow residential use. But the EPA and DEC, which is the state, have agreed that if we get an approved corrective action plan and we implement that successfully, that they would then file an easement for this property only to allow residential uses. So that limitation is going to be addressed upon a successful corrective action plan. Let me just describe some of the provisions about this project. Let's go back to the other site plan, Scott. So with our project, there are a couple of zoning requirements that this proposal doesn't quite meet squarely. As you're aware, the South End Innovation District has a residential component with respect to heights of buildings. You're allowed to go within the first 100 feet, you can go 4 stories. Beyond 100 feet, you can go up to 5 to 6 stories. This is the 100-foot line. And that goes right through the building. So one of our requests, our Brownsfield requests that we'll do at part of final under section 549 is make a request that we go to 5 stories. And that would be inside that 100 foot. So the buildings would be uniformly 5 stories high. The other request that we would make under that same provision is parking that is in the front of the building, technically in front. If we do have to activate the fronts of these buildings with commercial uses, we feel that in order for that to actually be successful, we do need to provide some parking so that there's easier access. The project has a significant less amount of impervious that the silt project had. It's concentrated on the 2/3 front of 453. Our stormwater protocol and management system is going to be similar to what was approved with the silt project. The largest concern with respect to stormwater here, well, there are two. We're not to promote or introduce any greater degree of infiltration than what already occurs. And we're to meet the water quality volume for our impervious. So the practice that we're going to employ is like a biovegetated basin that will occupy the water quality volume. And as that volume increases, it will then overflow and disperse off the site as it currently does today. It's kind of interesting. This site had been capped, not in a corrective action plan regard, but it was capped when they took out what's known as the Maltex pond and they took out the gasification plant buildings. It's capped with a heavy clay. So although it looks like it's grassed, it looks like it's has a lot of infiltration. If you stand out there in a rainstorm, it's running, dispersing off that site east to west, and very little of that runoff infiltrates. We also don't want to change the hydrogeologic balance of what the site currently has. That's one of the requirements of the institutional controls on the property. That was the stormwater management plan that was developed for silt was approved by the state. So we intend to kind of replicate that in a smaller scale for this project. I'm not the architect. We can go through some of the architectural renderings.
And we can jointly chat about them.
Okay.
I had just one question.
Sure.
So the corrective action plan and the stormwater management processes are almost kind of like pretty much interrelated with each other here.
They are.
Yeah.
Oh, every part of,
Complicated.
oh, it is. Every part of the property that we are having access to, managing or disturbing the soils is subject to the corrective action plan. And that includes the stormwater areas.
So I have a few just questions. So generally, adding another curb cut is going to create more contention with cyclists on that multi-use path. So one thing that I would just ask to consider kind of long-term is would it be possible to direct the traffic that's entering the garage to be joined from that other curb cut, maybe off of the drop-off or something like that, so that we don't have 2 curb cuts right next to each other where there's now a lot of cyclists that are using that path.
Well, yeah, and we're aware of the sensitivity with making too many curb cuts. This is the existing Maltex.
Yeah.
This is 500 feet away.
Yeah.
Are you referring to another curb?
I'm saying that one.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering if, would it be possible, because the parking structure is kind of up high?
Yeah.
Would it be possible for the entrance to the south building's parking to be from that rear, from the existing?
We can look at that. Part of this alignment has resulted that we are providing parking on the first floor.
Yep.
it's difficult to have a one in and one out in such a long distance. And we also have to think about the activation of the commercial space of the southern building. So.
And we were thinking we were making it better because there's the curb cut that the city had planned is further north. So it's closer to the existing ones, right where Scott had been. So now we're separating our curb cuts, 500 feet. And it's also a pretty good straightaway for visibility. Bikes and cars, I mean, they have a pretty good 500-foot stretch where they can see what's going on. So we did talk about that. We thought it was a safe place to have our curb cut.
The other kind of feedback on kind of talking about activation of the commercial spaces, there's a lot of pedestrian activity and people walking there, and the commercial is only activated from the parking spaces, right? There's no sidewalk connection from those commercial spaces to the actual multi-use path or the plaza or any other pedestrian spaces, and so it kind of deactivates it from the walking or biking visitors.
Let me speak to that. We have not stepped into the higher level landscape plans yet. And we're aware that that's a very important piece, that not only activating our own commercial spaces, but how we integrate that off of the bike path. So admittedly, that piece hasn't really been worked out.
I've got a couple questions on where you were asking for leniency, because honestly, I think this might be the first actual development we're reviewing in this district. We've only looked at the site divisions, and the street.
Under the SEID.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, it still came in before that was adopted.
What provisions in that district are you asking? Because any exceptions, we need to have the mechanism for getting there. So
Yeah.
are you looking for a variance request, or are there
Yeah.
other elements within
Sure.
there that you're?
Yeah.
looking to?
That's a good question. In our comprehensive zoning ordinance is section 549 that allows the DRB to waive use and dimensional requirements for properties that are subject to our Brownsfield conditions. In order to support that, we have to make a case. What is it about the property or the project that requires us not to meet the strict requirements? So in this case, let's use the height, for instance, because all of the studies and all the evaluations that have informed our understanding of the property is requiring us to be as far east as we can be. There's off of Pine along the frontage here, there's a 35-foot city easement. So we can't sneak the buildings closer to the street. So it just happens that 100-foot is right in the middle of the building. We would demonstrate that with all of the site conditions, all of the considerations that we have to go through that have made this a Brownsfield, the institutional controls, the limitations on the site and soils, that being further east is better. It's driven by that information, but it runs contrary with that particular 100-foot setback on height.
That makes sense. I think if I were to guess, I think the parking in front of the buildings is probably the thing that this board would have the least appetite to approve, because there is no parking requirement. And so any argument that the parking is necessary doesn't tend to fly with this board. So that would be a comment for you to consider when you come back to us.
Sure.
Here.
I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware that that's not an easy ask, and it's certainly not it's a pretty tough burden. We've been playing around with also this requirement. How do we make that a successful commercial space? And so we were challenged. We initially had more parking But we backed away from that. We realized that that may have been too much of an ask. So we've got a lot of thought to put into that. We have a lot of thought as to how we're going to meet that activation commercial space and how it becomes actually sustainable and long-term.
And the parking is really based on market and our experience, you know, for the apartments, the 79 Pine and 77 Pine, I know how much, you know, and that's more of a downtown location. You'd think there'd be less cars there, but I know, you know, what the market demands for parking when they rent an apartment from us. So we have that for our residential piece, and then the commercial piece, you know, we own a lot of commercial spaces and a lot of commercial tenants, and we have a good sense of what we need for parking. Market requires for parking there, so it's, you know, we don't want to build any more parking than we have to. It costs us money to maintain it, to build it, to everything. So this is what we think the market requires based on what we're building for parking.
Scott? I have a question about the building, the foundation. I know that the previous silt project had a very shallow foundation. And there was several different alternatives were looked at. Is there anything special about this foundation for these buildings?
We should do a little profile with the part, you know, with the showing the pillars.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know which one that is.
Let's kind of scroll through.
We had floor plans.
Yeah, okay, this is a good one. Both buildings, given the size and the footprint, will be founded on D piles. So the D piles will actually go to bedrock. That helps with loading, that helps with us meeting our requirement that we're not putting I'm gonna call it an unusual amount of load that would cause a change in hydrogeologic conditions such that our remedy would fail. So the safest way is for us to build on piles.
I know that's always been an option. Now, the other question is, I know that Redstone proposed a building here 10 years ago. Before that, Shaw's had proposed. How has the information, understanding of the site changed that didn't allow, like, say, the Redstone project to go forward, but is allowing this to go forward?
No, that's fantastic. I've been with this property and project and property owner for over 20 years. It wasn't until the BERA process, the Brownsfield Economic Redevelopment Alliance, that was convened in 2010, Scott? That monies were then allocated. And that was the first time that very serious heavy lifting geotechnical studies were done on these properties, which was necessary. It hadn't been done for any of the other previous. I worked for Pomerleau. I did a project with CEDA, with Freeman French Freeman. We didn't have available to us the geotechnical information that was funded by the BERA process. The BERA process also funded significant qualitative analysis. That's why we know where the NAPO is. That's why we know what the PAHs are. Those were evaluated, but not to the level of supporting a project. They were reported in the EPA's alternatives for correcting the pollution. But they weren't of a caliber and quality that one could rely on developing a project. Yeah. So the answer is a significant amount of study and evaluation has been done since 2010. And that's what supported the silt project as well.
I guess my last question is regarding the soil removals that you will need to do. You talked about taking it to a lined landfill. Have you considered, I don't know, Doug owns another property in Burlington that will be a receiving site that you could take this fill to, and you know, there's a process you go through with the state to allow a property to take the fill, and it's a more sustainable, you're not trucking it to Coventry, Vermont, you're keeping it in town. So just a thought, whether that is something you consider.
I think some of this is urban fill. or
Right.
Urban
Right.
soils, and I think we can do that.
Yep.
Yeah, we had talked to bring some nest soils to Eric's property.
Right.
Yeah.
On that, as a part of the corrective action plan development,
Yep.
that will be
That
evaluated.
will, good.
One of the things that the state doesn't want to do is pay for relatively uncontaminated soil to go to a lime landfill. And
Seeing more and more of it too.
Yeah.
Trying to be more sustainable about what we
Yeah.
do as well.
And that's a big concern with Graham at DEC. Just so you know, the money that has been allocated for the corrective action plan, it's under his control. Meaning it's under the state's control to review our corrective action plan, to pay for that corrective action plan up to $6 million or whatever's left, and to then be sure that it was implemented successfully. At that point, the state and EPA will then execute an easement to allow residential use on the property.
Yeah, you said the approval of the corrective action plan was the trigger that would allow the easement. I think it's gonna be the successful completion of the corrective action.
That's exactly what it's going to be. Yeah, because he can approve one,
Yeah.
but if we don't do it,
But then you do take a little bit of risk in that in the process of doing it, you find something you didn't expect to find, but it's not likely, but then it could,
you know,
It's a risky
it's
business.
a risky business.
it is. Fortunately, we have now we have about 10 to 15 years of intense site evaluations where hopefully there won't be any of those surprises.
I suspect you're right.
I know you had wanted to share more about the architectural plans, which if you want to walk through that.
We're all set with the site. You can stay up there, Scott, if you want. Doing such a good job.
I am not the architect.
But since he's here, we can say whatever we want about the building.
In part, this project is seeking to replicate in mass and character a number of the buildings that are on the Pine Street area. This is the Maltex building. And Scott, why don't we go to those?
Photos of the.
Yes, the photos.
Are you doing sketch plan with the DAB as well, or,
We will.
but you haven't done it yet?
We haven't, no. What we've done is we've gone to MTA, we've had TRC. We wanted to get in early on sketch just for a number of reasons, to get the ball rolling. But we're likely to go to the Conservation Board, likely to be going to, I would imagine DAB. So we haven't yet. This is just a collection of buildings that are in the Pine Street area that helped inform our architect's vision of what he was proposing for the building. Alan also worked for Pomelo back in 2003 when we were proposing office space. And so he was the architect then as well. Why don't we keep scrolling, Scott?
Back there to the elevation perspectives or?
Floor plan, elevation perspectives. So I think Alan would say that he's looking to have a similar look, not only in window sizes, brick facade. The first floor, as we've talked about, is going to be parking. That's a grade level. It will be open air. Why don't we keep going, Scott? That's how it relates to the Maltex building. Yeah, keep going.
They're basically different angles.
Yeah, different angles. Then let's go to the floor plan and I'll point out a few features. There's about 117 proposed units, a mix of studios, 1 and 2. Were there 3 bedrooms?
There are some 3 bedrooms.
3 bedrooms.
That are required.
All of the units, but for the studios, will have west-facing balconies. Of those 118 units, 15% of those will be required to be inclusionary. There's a variety of sizes and number of bedrooms. Anything else you want to?
On the, it's just an amenity on the first floor, we offer fitness and bike storage, which is important. We found with our market and similar to the Nest and 77 Pine, on the fourth floor, we will have a common lounge and roof deck where you can barbecue, and there's a pizza oven there, fire pits. It's really a really nice space that we created in our most recent two projects that the residents really like. So I think it's going to be a really a building that people love to live here. Great location.
So just kind of one additional just thought maybe for consideration on the commercial. So with that shared plaza space, right, there's potentially the opportunity. So currently somebody lives in the building, right, would leave, they'd go down to the bike path, they'd have to go down a substantial amount, go back up and then through, or they'd walk through the parking garage to get to the commercial space. And with the shared plaza, I think you might get a bit more activation from both residents there. And you potentially wouldn't need the front parking variance if you oriented the commercial towards the shared plaza instead of using kind of orienting it.
Yeah.
But would that require a separate variance because of the requirement for street facing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that orientation makes sense. We'd have to see how that fits into the requirement, the frontage, as I understand the frontage of a certain percent of the frontage has to be activated commercial space.
For me, just on a design perspective, because the two buildings are so long and symmetrical, the massing looks a little overwhelming to me, and I think more diversity in either the window spacing or the color of materials is something to consider, but that's something you can definitely discuss more in the TAB.
Yeah, we do have the elevator core that kind of breaks up the building, but these buildings are somewhat similar to a couple we built along the river in Winooski River Run and River House, and you view those buildings, they don't, some of them are smaller or actually larger, but some of them they don't, they don't feel that. Massing feels pretty good when they're built. It's tough for me. It's tough looking at these buildings without the detail of the brick and the windows being finished, and they feel very blocky and not very attractive. But I think we spend a lot of time on design of the projects we do, and it's important to us that they really look great.
Just another question about the site again. I know that there's gonna be institutional controls, but are the residents gonna be limited to be able to walk over to the barge canal? Is there gonna be fencing along there, like directed routes, that kind of stuff?
Well, two things have to happen. Anywhere that we would allow residents to occupy or reside has to be subject to our corrective action plan. How we do that with respect to the remaining property or the city property is subject to our discussions with DEC. What will be acceptable? What will that be a fence? Will there be other measures that we can employ that would satisfy DEC? They're concerned with that as well. That's we don't want to be inviting people to be trespassing where we know the property is not been prepared to allow the public to roam. So that's got to be addressed as a part of our corrective action.
Any other questions for the board?
Just one last thing, the South End Innovation District overlay here that I'm looking at is going to be part of the review here. So when you come back with a more of a refined design, trying to come up with answers to all where you have some shortcomings, so you want to justify those. And because you have this corrective action plan with the overlay district's emphasis on pathways and public open spaces and so on, just I'm sure you'll take all those things into consideration, come back with something good.
We would intend for that presentation to actually have a narrative response to all the criteria and highlight specifically any of those provisions that we felt were subject to the 549 waiver requirement.
Any other questions or comments before I pass it for public comment? I guess, Marina, online, any questions from you?
No, nothing for me.
Are all of you here to speak on this?
We have a few folks on Zoom too.
Online, okay. I'll just start it with then we'll go.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so hopefully people on here because we have the recording contract from
Okay,
that.
I have a brief question and a brief statement, and excuse me for overhearing, for eavesdropping on your conversation, but since AJ is employed by you, will he be recusing himself in this deliberation?
Yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Ruby Perry. I live in the South End. I live in the Five Sisters, which basically backs up to Pine Street. I'm also a friend of the Barge Canal, which is a nonprofit and of a 600+ mailing list. I'm mostly addressing you, but also to you. I'm pretty sure that Alan, who's not here, Scott and Doug have designed a project that attempts to slot itself into the multiple overlapping requirements of 453 Pine. But when all is said and done, it is a project that will not come to fruition, will provide no relief to the housing crisis in Burlington, will likely spend 4 to 6 million in state funds, yet nothing will be built. The Pine Street Barge Canal has already been exploited. It is time that we humans recognize our close relationship with the land and our responsibility to care for it. Burlington's prosperity can be traced back first to the lumber industry that thrived and caused the canal to be built, and the coal gasification plant that turned coal into lights for the growing and prosperous community of Burlington. Whatever money can be made from developing that site will come at great cost to the land, to the city, and to the developers. Now it is time for us to consider what we can do to protect our land, not just the Barge Canal. Superfund site or brownfield, no more money is to be made from the Barge Canal. Over 30 years, multiple developers have proposed projects ranging from, and you know them well, the outdated southern connector into the center of town, a gas station, grocery store, office buildings, bowling alley, and lastly, a Nordic spa. Since the rerouting of the road, all have had well drawn up plans, all have been approved by the DRB, and all have failed. This project is for housing, even though site-specific restrictions on housing and childcare centers have been in effect since 1998. Yet they believe their plans can show that it is safe and will be safe in perpetuity, including that they can in real time limit access to children to the surrounding natural area, which is Superfund site. The developers are presenting a project they believe will meet the federal, state, and municipal requirements, limitations imposed because of the 56 contaminants of concern in the soil. They believe they can demonstrate remedies that will involve removing multiple tons of soil, trucking it to the Coventry landfill, or God forbid, someplace in Burlington. So my question then is, can you also ensure that soil deposited in Coventry or on whoever's land in Burlington will not contaminate, will not leach into the Black River, which runs directly into Lake Memphremagog? Can this board guarantee that? And who is responsible for making that guarantee? The Barge Canal, despite being Burlington's industrial sacrifice zone, is still serving the basic needs of the city's population. It is containing the contamination, essentially healing itself without creating Superfund sites in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom or somewhere else in Burlington. With no help from humans, the Barge Canal is an evolving, diverse ecosystem that already manages much of the south end's increasing combined sewer overflows. If left alone, it will continue to bring tremendous benefit to the city far into a certain future of climate change. It is not a dead zone. It is not a vacant lot any more than it is waiting for further exploitation. It is alive and as such a vital resource to the south end and to the entire city. Build housing, build it in the south end, make it dense, make it walkable, bikeable. Get together with the landowners, developers, and neighbors and stakeholders interested in the south end. Doug Nettie, Rick Davis, MrDealer.com from Georgia, whoever he is, Russ Scully, Champlain College, and the mayor, all of those who have an interest in development in the south end. Make a plan to build the back parking lot of the Maltex building where you can put minimal parking underground. Convert Dealer to housing and convert the parking lots to the north and south of the building to housing. Make it relate to the Five Sisters neighborhood to the east and Jackson Terrace to the south and the struggling Seacourt development further south. Make it worker housing so it isn't surrounded by acres of parking lot. Make it interesting and beautiful. Make it desirable addendum to the Five Sisters neighborhood. Thank you.
Your name and where you live, and then we're happy to hear you talk.
My name is Andy Simon. I live on Locust Street, a couple blocks from here. And I'm involved also with Friends of the Barge Canal, which Ruby didn't mention is a volunteer run. I've been to the airport before. I have asked proposal for the Barge Canal. The ill-conceived drive-in food court that still hasn't been built, the beautifully designed spa and bathhouse, and now these impressive plans for new housing. Each time I have said essentially the same thing: don't build on the barge. I know that it is not the purview of this board necessarily to comment on aspects of the project outside certain defined criteria. However, the public's concern, my concerns, are broader than that and will need to be addressed. We all agree that there's a housing shortage in Burlington. We can probably agree that in response to that crisis, areas of the South End previously excluded from residential development need to be reconsidered. The SEID obviously does that. But the Barge Canal is different. It's unique and valuable and should continue to be excluded. There are other sites in the immediately surrounding area, which Ruby mentioned, among others, that are already paved over and could be, with a little imagination and a wider vision, be sites for new housing. In 1992, when proposals for this land were put forward by EPA, the residents of Burlington rose up and rejected. Then the Barge Canal Coordinating Council worked for 4 years to come up with a better plan. And the better plan was essentially leave the Barge Canal alone. Since then, the trees have grown, the animals have flourished, and the soil toxins have remained undisturbed. We should carry that plan forward and think about what's best for the land for Burlington. Yes, 453 Pine Street, the site of this latest proposal, is private land. Within regulatory boundaries, the DRB, the Planning Commission, Vermont DEC, EPA, and others, there is, in principle, freedom to do whatever pencils out. It's time now, though, to consider the broader interests of our community. Those include, but are not limited to, clean water, safe public access to green space, carbon sequestration as the climate crisis deepens, wild animal corridors, and stormwater overflow management. None of these are perhaps within the purview of the DRB, yet all of them should be considered when we approve this development. Thank you.
Your name, where you live, and welcome your comment.
Good evening, Madam Vice Chair and members. Thank you for having me. My name is Brian Klupner. I live up on Howard Street. I am the Vermont representative for this district, which includes this building and the site we are contemplating. And I'm generally philosophically aligned with my friends and neighbors, Andy and Ruben, who have a slightly different point of view on this project. We have spent a great deal of time and effort in the legislature this session wrestling with Vermont's housing crisis. And particularly at the moment, there's a great deal of attention on the community housing infrastructure program, the CHIP program, the project-based TIF program, addressing the fact that many of the appropriate sites for housing in the state need millions of dollars of infrastructure work to be realized. Road, electric, sewer, water, broadband. And we were at another meeting here and as I looked and thought about this project, in many ways, this is a perfect site for housing from that perspective. There's a road, there's a bike path, there's electric, there's water, there's sewer. It is walkable to City Market. It is walkable to social services up and down Pine Street. There's a bus line. And, I think, as one spends time working on the challenges facing Vermont, there are two themes that emerge very consistently, and that are screwing everything up for our efforts to be prosperous and meet the needs of our citizens. One is healthcare and the other is housing. They reach into every aspect of our economy and our communities. And I think it behooves us to balance the fact that when we build something like this, we hope it will last for, how long do you want your buildings to last? 100 years. 100 years. That is what Marty Bombard always tells me as well. He builds stuff for 100 years. We need to balance the fact that this is going to be here for 100 years. Generations of Burlingtonians are going to live with and in and around these buildings. We need to balance that 100-year perspective with the fact that we have a crisis and that has been building for decades now. And I think needs to be addressed with the urgency that a crisis calls for. The last thing I would add is the request for the variance on being 5 stories high within 100 feet. And I would just note that it is in fact a 4-story building that, because of the site requirements, have been elevated off the ground by a story. And as they mentioned, they are putting steel piles 80 feet down to the bedrock to avoid compressing. 86 feet. 86 feet. 86 feet down.
Plus or minus 6.
80 plus or minus 6. So, I again, having looked at the state housing situation around the state and in Burlington, and our concerns about building the right kind of housing in the right place being dense development in city centers with access to services. This project, I support it strongly and hope you will as well.
Got a couple of people online, it sounds like. If you would like to speak and you are online, if you could raise your hand so that you can be allowed to speak, that would be helpful.
Okay, we have Sharon Busher with me. No. Sharon, you can speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Sharon Busher, and I don't live in the South End, but I follow the city government pretty carefully. And so for the DRB and for the people that spoke to you about the zoning that allows a project like this to move forward, it's the Planning Commission that really is the body that sets and creates that zoning. And that was a process that I attended, even though I wasn't from the South End, and was assured that South End residents were involved and were supportive of the areas where the South End Innovation District zone was created. So I It's not an easy feat, but I urge those who spoke to go to, Charles Dillard is the planning director, and Sarah Morgan is the assistant director, and our senior director, I don't remember what her title is now, but both of them would be people to reach out to and express your concern about this. I am speaking to the DRB about the sketch plan if indeed this project moves forward. And so the people presenting it, the commercial space is much less than what was intended. And so the intent, as I understood it when listening to the whole process of creating this zone, was that originally this was, you know, our arts district, it wasn't the component, the residential component was smaller. So in order to not lose that maker space, the commercial, the first level needed to have some commercial space, and it needed to bring in the public so that that is why that first level is supposed to be of some size. And Scott referenced it in his report that it's 30% of what the size is. I'm not exactly sure. You DRB members, you have that in front of you, and I don't right now. So one thing is that I think that the commercial space needs to actually do what it was intended to do, and to keep the spirit of the mix of residential and commercial, I think is key for this South End Innovation District. It's not South End Residential District, it's Innovation District. So that's number one. Number two is, as I was looking at the parking dilemma and listening to the chair, the person facilitating the meeting today from the DRB, and speaking about no appetite for surface parking in the front of the building, I wondered, since parking, when you looked at your floor plans where the parking was, it is in close proximity to the commercial space on that first level. So if you could direct people parking wherever in the rear or whatever you're going to say, they could drive in and then park in that surface level parking to use that commercial space. I agree with you that people, if not living there or walking there or biking there, need a place to park. But I think it's solvable without making that parking in front of the building. And the last thing I want to say is that, and I know this is sketch plan, but I'm really concerned about the fact that because there's no minimum parking required, I'm very concerned that there's no ADA spaces listed. And I really feel that's key. And that's a detail that obviously there are a lot of details in a sketch plan that aren't incorporated, but I just wanted to put plant that seed for all of you. I believe there's a ratio for so many ADA units, you need a parking space. I don't know what that ratio is. And the last thing, I'm sorry, I lied. There's one last thing. You have a mix, a really nice mix, and I agree, different sizes. Some studios are almost the same size as one bedrooms. I love looking at plans and how architects and people design buildings and utilize space. But there are only, I think, four or maybe 12 3-bedroom units. And I continue to worry about the fact that families have great difficulty finding space. And I understand cost is one factor. The more bedrooms, the higher the cost. But I wondered about that ratio. So those are my comments. If indeed this project moves forward, I think some of the things that you have presented, some of the problems could be resolved with some modifications and cooperation. The height, I'm always concerned about height. But I am going to be silent on that. I don't have a solution. I see your dilemma. I think it's solvable, but I don't want to put forward any ideas because I'm not an architect. So thank you very much. Are you there? Hello?
Sorry,
Yep,
Sharon, we
we're
were on mute. We heard all of your comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that is all of the comment we have from the public. Any questions from the board for anyone we heard a comment from?
Oh, I had a question to ask them.
Okay. Anything you would like to respond to from the public comment, you're welcome to. You also don't need to.
I think we're probably set.
Yeah, just in reference to Sharon's comment, there is details about some of the parking that certainly would be included. So it wasn't an oversight, it's just a sketch that didn't make that detail.
And to be clear, that, you know, what we'd like to get some guidance on, you know, we're fully struggling with the height, how to figure that out with the setbacks, bringing the building east. The parking, we're really designed this for what we think the market wants. So since the parking in the front, then the commercials, you know, activization of the front of the space. We have some commercial space, but the more commercial space we have, takes up more parking, and then we start building more parking, you know, towards the west. So we start heading over the peat line and other environmental challenges if we don't preserve our parking underneath our building. So we're getting kind of pushed around by trying to make this a very environmentally responsible project.
Mine is one more follow-up question. I did say that the site plan says proposed new property line. Are you proposing to subdivide this lot?
Either we are, we're contemplating subdividing it, and the rear partial might go with the, you know, it could go with the multex piece, or it could go with the 501, which is towards the south. That'll just 501 wrap around.
Well, this would connect, this, do you want to go back to the site plan?
Sure, and that's more of a lot line adjustment than a subdivision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if subdivision is allowed. I think the grant of restrictive acts.
Yeah.
Easement doesn't.
I don't see this as being a separate lot because it doesn't have any frontage, so we would attach it to another lot.
Probably a lot line adjustment.
Yeah.
The majority of that part of that property is wetland buffer, city and state wetland buffer. We're looking at that as being an opportunity to take that out of the development mix.
Do you consider granting it, an easement to the city or
We're,
giving it to the city?
yeah, we're talking to Cito about that now.
Okay.
And one other thing that we did achieve is we stayed out of the 100-foot wetland setback, this plan, which wasn't achieved in the previous plan that we approved.
Right, that's a city.
It's a city.
100
foot setback.
So what you said you were looking for guidance from us on was
So the height,
the height.
so it's the parking, and the activization of the.
And you were referencing, can you just, the section on the ground?
5.4.9,
Yes.
the Brownsville provision, which hasn't been used before, Scott.
Never.
Never been used?
So there's not a lot of precedent. But it does provide guidance to the DRB as what they should receive and what they need to entertain to consider a waiver. And it's waiver not only of use, but also dimensional requirements.
Giving us a quick read so I can see if we can do it. Like, hasn't come up a lot.
still in discussion with the public works on sewage.
Yeah. Well, part of what we learned from the SILT project is this project, similar to SILT, will connect to the combined sewer in Pine Street. We're aware that we need to actually attenuate our discharge so it does not run afoul with peak storm events. And so that will be a holding tank that will be designed to not interfere or contribute to a peak overflow.
I mean, from my reading of this, I think you're still gonna have major issues getting the parking in front. I don't see how that can meet the standard. Because it is pretty clear on terms of it being the minimum necessary to grant relief on specific limitations, and because there is no parking requirement, I can see that being the biggest hurdle on this one. I think that in terms of the municipal development plan and the intent of the district, to Sharon's comments, I think anything more that you can do to be aligned with the intent of this district would probably really help our ability to grant a waiver. But I think the direction that you're going in terms of the limitations on the site makes sense to me. I'll see this other thoughts I want to share.
I do agree with the intent of the SID to make her commercial space somehow, meaning maybe reduce parking on that first level. Have some commercial on that first level.
So one question I have for maybe Scott. So reading through the SID front activation, it looks like so secondary frontages require 20% non-residential, primary frontages require 80% non-residential uses. Does this comply under the, so it's definitely not 80%. So does it comply because it's a secondary frontage, or does it comply?
It doesn't comply.
Okay.
So, right, so there's no secondary frontage here because it only has frontage on Pine Street, so it's a primary.
So
you can knock that down to 35%. I forget what the trade-off is, but even as proposed, it's less than 35%.
And so the other thing, when it's describing the primary frontage, it says either street or shared or public path.
Yep.
Would the center path be considered a public path or not, or is it just basically that shared use path that exists on Pine Street?
It's a shared use path.
I have a question about parking, because if we take our front parking away, we take parking away underneath our garage, then we don't have enough parking for people who live there and come and do business there. So I'm just wondering, so if we take this away, and we might suggest, people park in the Maltex building, whatever, but what if we take this away, but we have a access here anyways? What's the feeling of this parking towards the south off that access? Is there a sensitivity about that also?
It's considered side parking if it's behind the front of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear the board's comments. The parking is not in front of the building, it's to the side.
Yeah, I think
It's allowed to the side and rear. The
I've
board
always
okayed
interpreted
it.
that as like the side of the frontage and behind.
And the board also approved parking like actually in front for Rhino Foods because they needed it for their layout. And the applicants might want to consider looking at that.
And that wasn't a brownfield.
I would say I think there's lots of examples in like EDM like parking situations of having, right, you have commercial space that's underutilized at night for parking and overutilized during the day. And so this is residential next to a commercial lot. And so I do think the idea you proposed of figuring out parking potentially with the Maltex building during the hours that they're not really used as an office space would be a viable option for meeting your parking requirements. And I know the planning department is looking at things like that, but that's a solution that's worked in lots of other cities for managing parking demand when it's when it's elastic by time.
And I was just speaking about those 4 or 5 spaces because we've spoken to the partnership of the politics building. They're not willing to make any long-term commitments. So we can't, we can go bump along at 6 months, but it could go away. So we have to figure out a long-term solution for our residents of where they're gonna park when they live here.
I think, given this location compared to Rhino Foods, any parking you propose that is very visible from the street, I would just recommend you be very diligent about the landscaping around that, so the view of the cars is as minimized as possible.
I agree with what you're saying with that. Let's just, again, we're going to refer to the South End Innovation District overlay. We're just going to read something that I read from this. Buildings should be oriented to the public realm, streets, paths, and open spaces that would kind of create a safe, inviting district, etc. So in your design, if you can incorporate those, that feel that they're looking for in that district, it'll be more successful.
And I will say there's also street parking in front of this too, on the other side.
Not on that side.
I know,
Yeah.
I know, yeah, but
Across the street.
Do you have other questions for us that would be helpful at this point?
I think those 3 waivers, we were looking to get some guidance on before we start designing this in more detail.
Yeah. Have you gotten what you needed from that?
Are we gonna get any, Scott, are we gonna get any written comments or is this, what we heard is what we heard?
The minutes will be posted online.
Yeah,
There's no decision. It's set plan.
I think this is the tough one for us because
Yeah.
we have not seen the development plans before for this district, so it's a new
yeah.
sort of review for us. So,
Then we have 4 people that aren't here. Is that-
yes, we are missing our lawyers, which are
Yeah.
very helpful to us,
In the South End Innovation District is quite complicated the way it's written. It's not an easy to fit.
Yeah.
Forget about Brownsfield, forget about asking for a waiver, it's a very challenging provision. With a lot of intent, we understand what the intent was, but when you come down to try to actually fit that in, it's, there's a lot of challenges.
yeah. Yeah, I think whatever you can do to get closer to the intent of the district and then minimize the waivers that you need and focus on why they're limited by Brownfield, which I think where you started today was very helpful on that, on where you can actually build buildings.
so the other thing that was said too is, so the 100-foot looking at the overlay is 6 stories, not 5, correct? So it's 4 and then it switches to 6 and then it's 8 on the bigger.
That's right, yeah.
So 5 is actually in between the 2 zones, but there's no provision for like half stories or anything like that.
We're splitting the difference.
Right.
We're meeting you halfway.
But I just wanted to clarify, because I think in discussion, it was said that interior part is limited to 5 stories, but I don't.
No, I didn't mean it, we are 5,
Okay,
you're allowed to,
Yeah.
up to 6.
okay.
You've got a challenge on your hands.
They're all challenging. That's why we have a shortage of housing. And it's not easy.
No, I think that it was a very good overview and it makes a lot of sense. We've obviously got a lot of steps before they come back to us, but.
Yeah.
We're good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So we do have, our meeting is not closed, we have the communications item, which Garrett had posted in the chat that you actually can.
So Garrett did post it, which means it wasn't in the packet, it is now. It's not a big deal. The application is not before you again. It will need to be at some point. So you can accept and place it on file tonight or in 2 weeks, and all it means is that you've acknowledged it. In either event, it's tagged to the application file in OpenGov.
And so even though this is coming back before us, this goes in now, why? I should understand.
Because the neighbor wants to submit something in writing about it,
Got it.
so they can do that.
Okay.
We used to get them a lot more frequently.
This is the Green Mountain tree removal.
No, this is the other one.
The weird property that.
Oh, yeah,
Yes, 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 yes.
shared
Yes,
property
yes,
where
yes,
yeah.
you just went and cut a bunch of trees.
That one.
Yes, yep, yep, yep.
Someone wants to make a motion to acknowledge the communication.
I make a motion to accept the communications and enter it into the record, the proper motion.
Yeah, second.
Okay, Miles seconds, all those in favor?
Perfect.
Did Marina vote on that?
Yeah, sorry, I can't get on video, but yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're
Now
just
we can
accepting
close
that
the meeting.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't done sketch plan in so long.
Yeah, we don't see too many of them. We did one for Rhino, and actually we did one for Seaboard.
Oh, but that was just the streets, right?
It was like a really basic, like. Yeah.
No, like, we don't know what the buildings are
Yeah,
gonna be,
right.
this is just the
Here's
streets.
our streets.
That's why I'm like, this is.
Yes.
The way this was written in the notes, it was not really a sketch plan.
I have to go through all the criteria and point out what's wrong.
Yeah.
It's missing, yeah.
But no, we've never used that brownfield provision.
No, never. Are we adjourned?
We're adjourned.
Okay.